Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the end of week 9, which has been a wild week. A fun week in terms of the real life, but in terms of the DFS and in the props, a wild week. Went net neutral on props in the DFS streets, got absolutely slaughtered for the most part. Lamar Jackson, some Justin Herbert kept us afloat, but absolutely slaughtered. And I think most of the league did when you look at the Josh Allens, all these big favorites just choking, backup quarterbacks playing for the Packers and ruining that game environment to an extent. Backup quarterbacks playing for the Cardinals and making that game environment not as nice. But we got the one nice one, right? Minnesota, the Justin Jefferson comes through as a run back in some of those stacks. But unfortunately, not enough. So we had a fun Saturday. We had a fun Sunday. Had some friends visiting. They are now gone. We are buckling back up, ready on the horse tonight, zoned in on Monday Night Football to close out week 9. Let's get it. Let's get the schmacks right now. Let's wake up with the orange shirt, with the orange next to me. Just drove back from the airport. Have some caffeine in me. The sun is up. We're out there a little bit later today at this video because, hey, we got to get big little to the airport. But let's do it. Subscribe button pops up. Appreciate that a ton. Let's do it player by player. And there is not a lot of players in play on this slate. Oh, not at all. I only have projected out 22 players. For reference, normally I'm projecting out like 28. These teams are just very confined to a couple of players. One main tight end, a couple of running backs. One running back for the Steelers, and then their main 3 wide receivers for the most part. Like, there's not much else going on here in terms of value, and because of that, you're going to find another overpriced slate in terms of a lot of overpriced players, but it does lead to an interesting slate. And you can start up top with Najee Harris, Najee Harris is one of the things that is the most secure on this slate. There's about 2 players that are secure in this slate, both in the Steelers. Najee Harris is indeed one of those players. Because as a rookie, and this might have been the most clear as day thing that we saw based on what the Pittsburgh Steelers were saying on the offseason, based on their draft capital spending on Najee, how they were building this team. They said they needed to run the ball was the secret to getting better with Big Ben. Okay, well, sure. And what has happened so far? Najee Harris leads the NFL in opportunity share. He has had 90% of the Steelers running back opportunities this year. 7 targets per game. 25.3 total opportunities this year. And oh yeah, now he's in a matchup against the bottom 5 run defense. And oh yeah, he has a positive 20% offensive line advantage. And spoiler alert for you, the Pittsburgh Steelers offensive line is atrocious. It stinks. It's not so good. It's like the salmon that I had 2 weeks ago that made me sick, bad, like smells that bad, seems a little funky, but you still buy into it a little bit because you're like, you never know. No, bad idea. But in this matchup tonight, they actually have an advantage. That's how good of an advantage they're going to be having. So Najee Harris. So yeah, of course we're not fading Najee Harris. I don't care what the price point is on this guy when he's leading the league in opportunity share. You can try and get cute and fade him if you want to, but if you make that type of a decision, this is what we're trying to preach and teach here. If you make that type of a decision, positive expected value decisions, if you're going to just fade Najee Harris or guess the times to fade the 90% opportunity share running back on a showdown slate, you're going to lose in the long run. You're just not going to be able to guess, right? You're playing roulette at that point, and it's going to hit double zeros, and you're going to go busto. The other player that I talked about, I said that there's another guy in this slate that is very, very appealing in terms of his opportunities, and that's because in 3 out of his last 4 games, he has 13 targets. And in the game that he didn't, he had 9 targets. He is quietly, Deontay Johnson is very quietly, because he's on a team that's not exciting, and Najee Harris for fantasy is stealing the show. He is quietly 4th in the NFL with a 30% target share. That is the elite of elite territory once you start hitting that 30% number of target share. 10.5 targets per game, almost 7 receptions per game, and he's 11th. He's a wide receiver 1 week in and week out. He's 11th in the NFL with 18 fantasy points per game. I currently have all the projections, all the rankings, all the ownership. The optimizer is loaded. The Discord is chirping right now for Monday Night Football, and I currently have Deontay Johnson right now projecting out for 16.4 fantasy points. That makes him my 3rd highest projected player on the slate, meaning that technically, as I do like him, and he has a much higher ceiling than this next man, but technically Ben Roethlisberger is underpriced here because Deontay Johnson's ceiling is factored in, yes, but I have Ben Roethlisberger for 0.8, so about a point more than Deontay Johnson today on average. Of course, the ceiling can come out for Deontay today. He can find the end zone and outscore his quarterback. But on average, I think that Big Ben Roethlisberger is going to score similar to outscoring his wide receiver in Deontay Johnson, and he's underpriced here. So just by that replacing X with Y and Y with X, then we get to the process of Big Ben also must be a Y if I haven't projected more points than Deontay Johnson. And also when you factor in the rest of the slate, a quarterback at 10,600 who is struggling in Roethlisberger, only 14 fantasy points per game, but has these spike weeks of the 17 to 18 variety. He's going to this week have a positive advantage. He's throwing 38.5 times per game, and now he gets the Bears defense that is not your same mom and pop's Bears defense. Number 30 in defense overall, number 29 coverage unit. So Big Ben Roethlisberger, I don't love it. I don't love it by any means, but he is going to remain in play today. We get down to the quarterback in Justin Fields here, and after we talk about Justin Fields, we'll start hitting on some of these props that I have. But Justin Fields, as it stands right now, also for me currently is going to be a yes. And Justin Fields, look, I get it. We have a bunch of yeses on here. Trust me, that's not going to be the case. It's pretty top heavy because when I have a yes on here, I'm just trying to find out the amount of times that they're in an optimal lineup. Do I want to play Big Ben and Justin Fields together? No, you probably choose one of those, in my opinion, because I really want to get exposure to Najee Harris and Deontay Johnson a large amount. Justin Fields has a negative 39% offensive line advantage against the number 3 Pittsburgh pass rush today. I have Ben Roethlisberger projecting out for almost 3 more points than Justin Fields. So when you're talking about, do I want to go to Ben Roethlisberger or Justin Fields, on paper, without knowing the rest of your lineup, it is going to be Ben Roethlisberger. But again, overall total lineup ownership, leverage, we'll have the final ownership tonight on the live stream, which if you're subscribed to the channel with the notification bell tapped, you'll be able to get in there and answer some Q&As, so get up in there right now if you would like to. But Fields at this point ranks 31st with 20 attempts per game. He ranks 32nd with 124 passing yards per game, and he only has one game above 27 attempts. So why is he a yes? It's just a matter of what is next on this slate. He has $10,400. So if you want to just try and make a distinction here, if you wanted to say above all these guys at 10,000 or more, yes, I would take Big Ben over Justin Fields. If you're playing just one lineup, this is how I would set it up. I would set up Justin Fields as in play, not as secure. He's an X, meaning a maybe, compared to Ben Roethlisberger, Deontay, and Harris. If you're playing 20 max, hell, if you're playing 3 max, and if you're playing definitely 150 max, Justin Fields is definitely a yes of somebody I'm going to be getting probably 40% of or more. But we can talk about that in the live stream. But here's the big issue. The big issue is now there's a drop-off. You get a $9,000 Chase Claypool, who honestly, yeah, there's going to be some low-owned leverage, and we're hoping that we find leverage here. I have Claypool projecting out for 12.8 fantasy points, coming in with lower ownership compared to the guys above him at right now only 40% ownership on the Patreon tools. Get him down below. Become a member of a community that has 1,000 people. Thrive in a community, a family. We're having a lovely time. Come on in. How you doing? So Claypool remains in play, but he can't be a yes for me at this point just because of the fact that Big Ben is only throwing 4 passes per game of 20-plus yards downfield, which is where Claypool is going to have most of his success. But Claypool's staying on the field in 2 wide receiver sets with no juju. He played 97% of the snaps last week, which was nice. It ended up leading to 5 targets. He has 5+ targets in every single game this year and 5 red zone targets in his last 3 games total. So that's good. Claypool is still getting usage. He's getting elite usage, and you get a nice discount of $2,200 off of Deontay Johnson. As ownership starts to get closer, right now I have Deontay Johnson projecting for 20% more ownership than Claypool. If that's going to hold later on in the day, I do think that Deontay Johnson is still the much better overall play, but Claypool starts to become that leverage play, that golden goose in this weird range that we're about to get into with these next couple of plays. And it's a weird range because David Montgomery at $8,400, as of right now, he's a no for me. He's a no for me as of right now. The news that we have is that they're hopeful that he can play. What all the Twitter doctors and the doctors in general are saying, based on this injury that he has to be ramped up. He can't just go in there cold turkey and have 18 to 22 touches. Like, they're going to ramp him up to 8 to 12 touches if he plays today, and this would be his audition to see if he's actually over this injury. And really just kind of the get his legs back under him game. So, I mean, if you're going to even get the higher part of that, 12 touches for $8,400, you're going to have to find the 2 touchdown game out of David Montgomery. And oh yeah, he's not going to be in the easiest of matchups today because he's going to go up in a matchup against a very good defensive line in the Pittsburgh Steelers. So that's not great. So you have David Montgomery. If he does indeed play today, it's also probably going to make Khalil Herbert a no, because then Herbert drops down from getting his 18+ opportunities per game that he's seen in each of his last 4 games, the rookie Khalil Herbert, in a matchup against this number 3 run defense of Pittsburgh, and he's going to have those 10 targets the last 3 games. He needs Montgomery out, though. That's the only way that Khalil Herbert is going to be in play today. So Khalil Herbert becomes a maybe. If Montgomery is out at $8,200 and you can start to expect somewhere around 15+ touches with target share involved there, you can get a couple targets per game, $8,200 starts to become closer to a yes. If Montgomery is in, I'm going to have Khalil Herbert as a no. So he's not going to stay as this maybe. It's either probably a yes or a no based on Montgomery's status. Again, if Montgomery is in, I'm not playing either of these guys. They're going to cut into each other probably 50-50, and those price tags are both too much for that workload. And now as we continue to go through here, I have a 5-pick flex play today, so we can talk about it quickly as we go through. We talked about a couple of these players already, right? We talked about Justin Fields up top. I have him over 174.5 passing yards. That obviously doesn't feel great based on his averages, but lately he is throwing a little bit more. He's thrown over 30 times once this year, but that was 2 weeks ago. 27 or more attempts in each of his last 3 starts. I have him for right around 203 yards. We take the over. Zach Gentry, who we're going to talk about, I have him over receiving yards. He's involved now more with Eric Ebron out and 2 tight end sets. And a couple other players that we're going to get to. I have Ray McLeod's under. This is all receiving yards. I have Darnell Mooney's over, and we're going to kind of try and correlate that with the over that you're seeing on Justin Fields. If Fields goes over, there's a good chance Mooney does, and vice versa. And then Marquise Goodwin, the wide receiver 3, we're going to take over 12.5 receiving yards, as he has had 12 or more receiving yards in 3 straight games and massively over that number in each of the past 2 games. So what is this? It's just player props. You take the over-under. Many of you are already doing it. Many of the members of the community are playing. There's channels in the Discord right now. But if you want a free bet up to $100, free, F-R-E-E, you can follow that 5-pick parlay right there, or a 5-pick flex play. I put $50 on that one. If it hits, we end up going for $500 Rooskies. We go out to the mall. If we only get 4 out of 5 right, we still win money. If we get 3 out of 5 right, you get some of your money back. So it's just not a straight parlay. That's why it's so much better than what you're getting at the sportsbook if you're trying to combine props from the in-game parlay. It's not a parlay. You don't have to get all 5 right if you're doing a flex play. So if you use the code SAL, you get a free bet. Listen up. Free. F-R-E-E bet up to $100. Take advantage of it. Time's running out. free bet up to $100. Rooskies, the partners over at Prize Picks, the beautiful people over there, the beautiful people right there, coming together for free bets. And hopefully you win some money. If you don't win some money, that's their money. Who gives a shit? And now we start to slide through this because we're kind of through the large majority of this. We're already down to the 7K range, and we're quickly going to be into no man's land, right? So you have Allen Robinson, who has just been the biggest trouble for anybody who's drafted him, probably drop-worthy at this point. He's struggling with just a 21% target share, and that target share is not even that great because they don't throw a lot, so it's only 5.5 targets per game. He has one game above 10 points this year, 10 fantasy points. In that game, he had 10.4, so no games above 10.5 fantasy points if you want to get very minute with it. And he's only topped 5 targets one time since week 3. Allen Robinson today projects out for me for less than 10 fantasy points. That is one of the only times this year that Allen Robinson has ever in his probably career in the last 5 years projected out for less than 10 fantasy points. It is not a great matchup. His quarterback does not throw a ton. His target share is not great. His quarterback does not throw downfield. His quarterback is mobile and takes off more and scrambles instead of making the play extend for downfield looks. So Allen Robinson at $7,200, he does not look like a good play at this point. Compared to the fact that most of this 5 and 6 and 7K range is overpriced, Allen Robinson stays in play because, like we said on the other slate, and a lot of people came back into the YouTube comments, and I just laughed, and it was just like, these people got nothing better to do, and they were just like, you said none of these guys were good plays in this range on the Thursday night slate, and I said, no, you didn't even open up them earballs. I said that all these guys in this range are overpriced. It's going to take touchdown or bust for them to get there. And what happened? The touchdown or busts, 3 of them got there, right? So that ended up happening in that game. Jack Doyle gets their touchdown or bust, right, in that game in the little flea flicker. Elijah Moore gets their touchdown or bust and on a wide open touchdown, and then late in the game when they're just playing soft zones. That is the exact same analysis for these next couple of players. Allen Robinson is overpriced for a guy who's going to see 5 targets tonight at $7,200, but he's touchdown or bust. Pat Freiermuth, the rookie, at $7,000 for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Shout out Penn State, right? He is $7,000. I get it. In week 8 with no Ebron, he had a season high 26 routes, right? He caught 4 of his targets for 44 yards and a touchdown. He now has back-to-back games with over 13 fantasy points and at least 7 targets. This is great. Do I think Pat Freiermuth, a rookie tight end, is going to see 7 targets per game every single game of his career? I do not. I think that is the high numbers. So if Pat Freiermuth starts to regress to a 4 or 5 target game today and he's not scoring touchdowns, you're going to get Pat Freiermuth scoring 6 fantasy points at $7,000. He is massively overpriced. I don't know how Pat Freiermuth is not in the $5,000 range. So Pat Freiermuth at this point, he is obviously involved in the red zone. Like, he's seeing red zone targets almost every single week. Now there's no Ebron. So Pat Freiermuth also himself is going to remain in play because a 3-catch, 40-yard and a touchdown day gets him to 13 fantasy points, but he is clearly touchdown or bust at this price tag. In this price range, I have Pat Freiermuth actually being a worse play than Allen Robinson based on my projections. The best play in this range is now up right here, and that is Darnell Mooney, because Darnell Mooney is actually fairly priced. $6,400, who is the clear number 1 receiver for Justin Fields at a 26% target share and 6.6 targets per game. He has at least 8 targets in 2 out of his last 3 games, and in 50% of his games this year, he has scored at least 12 fantasy points. And at this price point, 12 fantasy points will get you there. He has the most deep targets on the team. He has right now the best projection. He's actually the only guy right now for me on this slate. The only guy below $8,000 projecting out for double-digit fantasy points. That just tells you how this slate goes. So Darnell Mooney, we have him over 9 fantasy points because I have him at around 11 in my projections. So you take that on Prize Picks, get your free $100 bet with the code SAL. So it's $6,400 Darnell Mooney. On paper right now, looks like the best option in this range. He will also be the highest owned, but he will be pretty similarly owned to some of the defenses and also his teammate Allen Robinson, so I don't think it's a terrible play by any means. Next up, you get Cole Kmet. So yet again, another young tight end here. This is a second-year tight end, Cole Kmet, out of Notre Dame. He's seen 5+ targets in 3 straight games. And over those last 3 games that he's had, he's seen 17 targets. He's seen 12 catches for a little over 100 yards. I mean, that's a solid production for a tight end. That's about $4,000 range tight end. He's played 70% of the snaps in every game, 90% each of the last 2 weeks. Jimmy Graham is not even involved. He's not even the tight end 2 at this point. So Cole Kmet has taken over. But again, a low-powered offense where your 2 receivers are seeing 5.5 and 6.5 targets per game, and your quarterback's throwing maybe 25 times, 30 times if you're lucky. That's where Cole Kmet starts to see, about 5 targets. And if he's not finding the end zone and his average depth of target, 5 catches for 30 yards is not getting you there more times than not. I have Kmet for 7 points tonight. And just like on the Thursday night slate in this mid-range, I have Kmet, as many of those players were and many of the players are in this range, a touchdown or bust candidate. We can keep that ball rolling with James Washington, who is actually, as it stands right now, out of these players in the 5, 6, and 7K range, the worst play that I have there based on projections. James Robinson right now is the wide receiver 3 on the team that does not use many wide receiver 3s. They're using a lot of 2 tight end sets. James Washington last week, though, I think I said Robinson. James Washington was much more involved in week 8 than week 6 before the bye, where he barely played and where Ray McCloud actually ran 34 routes against the Seattle Seahawks. Washington operated as the wide receiver 3 with 21 routes last week, but only saw 1 target. He only has 2 targets over his last 2 games, under 50% snaps in both of those games. They're using tight ends more. Obviously, Najee Harris is ahead of him in the pecking order. So James Washington is right now the number 4, probably number 5 option in this passing game, and he's $5,200. So again, a touchdown or bust player here. In his 1 to 2 targets today, can he contribute a touchdown on those at $5,200? I only have him for 4.5 fantasy points, which makes him a very bad play. If you know me, you know I don't like paying up for defenses, but a $5,000 Pittsburgh Steelers defense on a slate like this is actually going to be a pretty strong play, especially in small field contests. I mean, this team right now gets Justin Fields, who has not been good. They are top 5 in pass rush, top 5 against the run. They're not good in the secondary, which is the one spot why we're trying to attack it with Justin Fields being an underdog in this one by touchdown, has facing a somewhat weaker secondary. If he has any time to throw, that's where we like the Darnell Mooney overs. That's a reason why we like his over passing yards. Get some garbage time in there. A $5,000 Steelers defense is my highest projected play of anybody right now at $5,200 or below, so they're going to be a yes. Marquise Goodwin, for DFS purposes, is a no. We took his over 12.5 receiving yards because, look, if Marquise Goodwin has 2 catches for 18 yards, we're winning that bet. 2 catches for 25 yards, we're winning that bet, but 4.5 fantasy points is not working for us because, my man, you are overpriced. And I only have him for 3.5 fantasy points right now. Now, look, he's a wide receiver 3 on a low volume offense, right? He has 12 targets so far through the last 6 weeks total, so 2 targets per game. He has so far only topped 5 points once, and that's when he had 5.2 points last week. He has been the most active he has ever been these last 2 weeks, and that has only led to 8.5 combined fantasy points through those 2 weeks on 7 targets. So expect in this game 2 to 3 targets for Marquise Goodwin, and we're hoping that instead of 1 catch, it goes to 2 catches, and we can get to over that 12 number on PrizePicks, but I don't want it on DFS. The kickers, more so than most slates, are going to be in play here. Chris Boswell is going to be in play. If you're choosing between kickers, I'll go to Chris Boswell over Cairo Santos. Boswell practiced in full on Friday after getting absolutely destroyed in last week's game with a concussion. He should be back for this one. Jesse James, another Penn State tight end on this slate, right? They have 2 Penn State tight ends on this slate. Jesse James, the former Steeler revenge narrative, all this stuff at $3,000. Does it make Jesse James in play a touchdown or bust candidate? He only has 27 total routes on the year. He is taking over ahead of, though, Jimmy Graham these last couple of weeks. He has 6 targets the last 2 weeks. That's where all of his production has come from, playing 42% and 32% or 36% of the snaps in those 2 weeks, but he's not going to be much in play for me. Bears defense remains in play because you're getting down to this range where it's actually interesting that they're only $2,600. The Steelers offense has not been anything of a juggernaut. They're definitely turning the ball over. Big Ben is not threatening vertically. The problem is the Bears defense is ranking right now 30th overall and basically outside the top 25 in all main categories: against the run, coverage, tackling. Their pass rush is the only thing that is still decent because Khalil Mack is still having a decent year. Bears defense at $2,600. That's going to definitely be in play on a showdown slate, in my opinion. Ray McCloud is a really tough one. It's hard to project Ray McCloud, in my opinion. I'm going to put him here as a no. In week 6 against Seattle, he ran 34 routes, but in that game, it only ended up leading to like 1 target, so not great. But then this last week, he ended up being converted backwards. He only ran 4 routes, Ray McCloud, a gadgety, gimmicky player. If you remember Ryan Switzer for them, more of a special teams guy that just kind of runs these end arounds. And the only thing to say why it went down so much was they gave more routes run to James Washington, which I think makes sense, and more routes run to Zach Gentry, the backup tight end, who is somebody that we're going to talk about next. Zach Gentry is a backup tight end who has had some nice preseason performances in the past, really just 1. And in week 8 with no Ebron, he saw a season high 14 routes. His season high before that was only 8. And what did it lead to? He saw 5 targets on 14 routes. Don't expect that again, but if he's going to run 14 routes, you get 2 or 3 targets. He had 2 red zone targets last week, 3 catches, 39 yards. So coming off of a 7 fantasy point day, I have him projected about 4.5 fantasy points. We like that over 10.5 receiving yards. Zach Gentry, if you're looking for a punt play this week, if there's one punt play and you're not playing the Bears defense, the only punt play that I see below $3,000 is Zach Gentry, because Ryan Nall will only play if he's the backup with no Montgomery out there. And even last week when he played, it's still the Khalil Herbert show. Ryan Nall only saw 10% of the snaps and got his first touch of the season last week with no Montgomery because Damian Williams is also out. And then next up, the wide receiver 4, who's behind Cole Kmet, so the wide receiver 5, who's probably behind Khalil Herbert or Montgomery in the backfield, so really the wide receiver 6, 6th option in the passing game, Damiere Byrd, the veteran, on a low-powered offense is not something I want. He has only ran more than 10 routes 1 time since week 3. He has 37 total routes over the last 5 games, leading to just 2 targets, 1 catch, and 10 yards. So that is going to be a no for me. So as you can see here, there are some value options. Zach Gentry, Bears defense, the kickers. But after that, there's not much value. You're in a mid-range where, again, it's going to be touchdown or bust. In that mid-range, the Steelers defense and Darnell Mooney look good. But all these guys in here should run 20-plus routes. Freiermuth, Robinson, Cole Kmet, and James Washington. So if they find themselves into the end zone for a touchdown, they will be a play. But other than that, they're not going to look good without the touchdowns, the far majority of them. And then up top, you're just going to have to really feel good about your secure plays even more. So that is where we are at right now. That is where we are at as this slate starts. I appreciate you being here right now. Come on and join the Patreon community. But as we go, and before we go, let's just kind of build out a shell of what a lineup would look like on SuperDraft tonight, where there's $30,000 to first place. I have SuperDraft projections, so we can reference those and get in 3 guys in this lineup. Deontay Johnson is my highest projected player, and Deontay Johnson has a 1.3x multiplier. So SuperDraft is just a multiplier format. It's the best spot to put your money tonight if you're putting it anywhere, because the contest won't fill. So you'll literally have to face like 10 to 20% less of the competition, and you still get the same payout. So you have to beat 80% of the field instead of 100% of the field on DraftKings and FanDuel. So it's an interesting spot. It's definitely the best spot to build a bankroll. Definitely the best spot to ever win a tournament, just because you have to face 20% less people. So obviously that's a whole lot easier, right? And anything that you're doing, you should always try and find the edges, and that's a pretty big one. But if we're looking at my projections right now, Deontay Johnson's multiplier is higher, which means better for us, but they're indicating that Ben Roethlisberger and Justin Fields will have better performances on average than Deontay Johnson by a factor of 20%, which is nowhere near my projections. So Deontay Johnson, we take the over there. We have Darnell Mooney and Pat Freiermuth, who are by far the best plays. Pat Freiermuth has a 2.1x multiplier. What does that mean? It means that he has a similar multiplier today to the kickers, to James Washington, to even Ryan Nall is somewhat close. Like, come on now. He's going to have a much more involved role. You can figure out the last 2 spots on your own. I think the kickers are in play. I think the quarterbacks are obviously in play. Obviously, Najee Harris is definitely in play. But you can figure those last spots out on your own. $30,000 in play tonight. The contest likely will not fill. Check it out on SuperDraft. Use the code SALLY. Get a free $25 Rooskies. Again, the best spot, your best chance of actually winning. And if you want to win, if that's your goal of playing the money and not just losing it all the time, that's where you can get a 20% edge just built in, right? That is a massive skill edge. If you're grinding your ass off, your skill edge is maybe like 5 to 10% compared to the rest of the competition, just based on the averages of the amount of people in there. You're getting a 20% edge, double or triple that, just by entering a contest that doesn't fill, which is still happening on SuperDraft. Get it while it lasts. Get it while the site is still alive, because who knows how long that'll last. So thank you for tuning in. I appreciate you all a ton. We'll see you later on in the live stream today. Monday is the busiest day of the week. It's the best day of the week. We got to get through it. We got to get rolling. We got to get some food, some more coffee, some more water, some more schmacks. We'll see you when we see you. We'll see you later today.